investigation session. And we're going to talk about, I think the title is pretty descriptive. We're going to talk about how data journalism can be useful for more than just interactives and visualizations. I think in the newsrooms today, many editors and even many people, I'm sure that many journalists that are a colleague of yours have told you, oh yeah, data, visualization, interactive, clicking through, right? Like a graphic. I think that that's an association that many people do, and it's not just that. So we're here to talk about that. And we have three great people in the panel. We have Daniele Grasso to the left. He's Italian. He's 30 years old. And he's the editor of the data team at El Confidencial, which is one of the leading Spanish online newspapers. So he's Italian, but half Spanish. Daniele, what does your title really mean? No, you have to click there.
Okay. Thanks for the introduction. Well, my title basically means that I'm the one in the data team that fight with the boss to get our story selected, and in our data team that we are free journalists. I am the one that make a bridge between the data weird guys and the rest of the newsroom and the other reporters.
And if you want to read more about Daniele, please read his bio in the website, but tell us one interesting thing about you that is not in that bio.
Yeah, I'm supposed to have prepared this, but I've not know. Actually, the fact that I think it's interesting that when a lot of us came from the university and want to start being journalists, well, I didn't start being journalists. I started being a pizza delivery guy, and now here I am. So it's an interesting path.
Great, thank you, Daniele. To my right, we have Paula Guisado. She's from Spain. She's 28, although at some point this year she will be 29. And she's a data journalist at El Mundo data unit. So what does that mean?
Well, oops, sorry. Well, it means we use Excel. And yeah, really, my favorite sentence about data journalism is it comes from a colleague from a news agency in Spain, and he said that data journalists are people who has the superpower to sort a column in Excel. And yeah, we've been that for a long time. We still are that for many people at the newspaper. And I also, besides using Excel, I also coordinate the collaboration from El Mundo with the network IKE, and we do some investigative project on the long term. But still, if you ask someone around there, definitely Excel will be the word.
IKE meaning European Investigative Collaborations, which you may know from Football Leagues is one of their biggest hits. And what is that one thing you want to tell us about you that is not in your bio?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, and I think recently the thing that makes me more proud, and I'd like you to know, is we have a colleague at El Mundo who's owning a bakery, like an organic and very good thing bakery, with a colleague, and he's delivering bread at El Mundo. So for years, he's had like a mailing list, and he would say, okay, like every day, twice a week, I have raisin bread, and I have all kinds of bread. And then people would send an email, and would say, okay, I want one of those, one of that one. And then he would take all the emails 2 days a week and get the list, and then he would deliver the bread. Last week, a colleague from my data unit and I thought, hey, why don't you use Google Drive? What? And then we created an Excel, again, in Google Drive with the names of the people who could ask for bread, with a column for each kind of bread, and a super difficult formula multiplying the price of the bread for the amount, so people couldn't say one, another one, and then it's, okay, that's €6, and that's 3 of these, 2 or 4 of that one. And we've improved his life so much that really it's 2017, that's my best ever. For now, is that.
Right, so we are people, beyond being journalists, but data fulfills our lives in all the ways. And then last but not least, we have Caelainn, Barr, She's from Ireland. She's 32. She's the data journalist at the data projects team at The Guardian. So as you can see, we have different combinations of titles who seem the same, but maybe are not the same. So what does your title mean?
So I work on the data projects team, where we tend to work on longer term pieces. It's very collaborative work. So we work across the newsroom with any reporters who really want to have a data element to their work, or want to have, some kind of empirical structure to an investigation. And then we work with editors across the newsroom, and typically, although we're talking about that it's not all cool graphs, we absolutely work very much with the visuals team as well. So my job very much involves kind of sourcing data, analyzing it, structuring it, finding the news lines, occasionally writing the story as well, but very often that'll be in collaboration with another reporter too.
Great. And what do we need to know about you that you've hidden from your bio?
I think it's pretty out there that I'm Irish. I'm quite proud of where I come from. I'm from a pretty rural part of Ireland called Donegal. It's very beautiful. It's right up on the northwest coast. So I'm pretty proud of where I come from.
Great. And I am Cabra. I'm from Spain, and I'm 33, the oldest in this table. But it also speaks of how many young people are inside the newsrooms having interesting data journalism positions. I'm the editor at the Data and Research Unit at the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and that actually means I am like an air controller that deals with a multidisciplinary team of programmers and reporters, data reporters, that help ICIJ make great cross-border investigations like the Panama Papers. And what you need to know about me, so that you know about my past, is that I have a previous life as an actress, and I was a dancer in a movie called 20 Centimeters, for the 20 centimeters that you're thinking about, but it's not a porn movie. So I'll let you Google what 20 centimeters. It's a musical. It's not. I did not do porn. But with that in mind, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do with this 45 minutes that we have to really talk about data. Each of them is going to do a 5-minute presentation. I'm going to be hitting their heads if they go over 5 minutes, and then we're really going to open it up to questions. So if you can start thinking about your questions, that'd be great. And Daniele, you go first. If you can hit the stand, that'd be great. And Daniele is going to tell us about how he thinks, and he's going to try to prove it, his team is essential for his newsroom. We're not hearing him.
Hello? Whoa. Okay. I was telling Mar that I don't think that we are essential. I know that we are essential for the newsroom. It's a fact. Just to give you a brief light on what is El Confidencial, that maybe some of you don't know. It's an online newspaper in Spain, digital only.
We need to be able to see the presentation. Sorry. Can you put them?
Thanks. It's digital only, and although sometimes we are presented as a startup, it was born 15 years ago when it was something like a page with a lot of links to other webs, where now it's a proper newspaper. And we are around 100, and we have a newsroom of around 120 people working there all day, all night. And we have also a data team. We were 3 years ago the first data team in a media in Spain. We are 3 people, 3 data journalists, and we work also with a multidisciplinary area with designers and with programmers. But basically, I want to go really fast through 3 things that I think that can prove you that we are essential. At least today, we are essential to the newsroom. And basically, if it works. Yeah, maybe the connection to the internet. Let's refresh. Sorry for that. Okay, I have it. Okay, great. Yeah, great. Well, actually, this is a story. It's in Spanish, but I will sum up to you. It's a story about, as in every country, Spain, we have public defendants that are lawyers that defend the states in some cases. Well, we knew, because every journalist knew that in Spain, that some of that lawyers sometimes defended the state against companies for which they were working, also or companies that they were consulting or helping in other ways. So we didn't know who they were, and from the data team, we had the simple idea to go for the names of these lawyers, and we asked them through the freedom using the transparency law that is quite new in Spain, and not just using it, asking for it, but also fighting for it, because we were. The institution were not giving us the data, so we were like a 4-month fight between us and the institution to get the data. So it's just a simple example of how we are like the really center of every request for information that is made from a Confidencial newspaper in a country where the transparency law is really new, and so typical reporter and typical journalist still today don't know exactly how to use it. On the other hand, we work a lot on creating our own databases on two sides, internally and as internally, just to use them and to find easily pieces of data, and then on the other hand also to create stories. For example, this is a story that we published 1 month ago. As you may know, Spain has one of the best law in Europe to protect women against violence from their husband and couples, but there were no public database with all the women that have been killed by their husband and couples. So we created one, starting from open sources that were on the internet or news pieces of news in other media. We create our own databases that right now other researchers are coming to us to ask to use this data. And actually the other day there were the woman number 800 killed by a man, since there is a law to protect them in Spain. So we give another perspective to this problem, and then we also centralize all the big projects and big investigation that come to a newspaper. As you may know, reporters has a super stressful life. They need to publish something not for tomorrow but for yesterday always, so they can't stop writing and doing what they're doing. So every big projects, and we know that big in digital is everything that lasts more than 2 days, so every big project come to the data team. And that was the case of the Panama Papers, that in Spain has a quite huge impact, as in the rest of the world. And also for other little projects and more common projects, like for example one we did a couple of months ago about the sizes of the clothes that are sold in Spain, that the 80% of them are just for girls, for women clothes, so that's just for girls that wear an S size. So these are kind of projects where we can help the rest of in the newsroom. They can follow up with their daily work, their normal life in the newsroom, and they give to us a piece of their work to help them making a better project, or simply a longer project sometimes. So they were just 3 insights of our work. I really don't want to take more time, and please think about good question. I'll put us in struggle.
Great, thank you, Daniele. And the next to speak is Paula. And so even though it's 2 different Spanish newspapers, the data teams work very differently. Maybe they're not as integrated in the newsroom as in El Confidencial, but you have had successes, so tell us about them.
Yep, I wish I could say we are essential, I think we are. I'm not sure everybody thinks we are, but I'm going to talk to you basically about two things we've done lately. One is we force the data to come to us. I mean, I don't know if you see that quite well. That's a declaration of assets from one member, whoever, of the Congress. And you can't see the letters because that's what it's uploaded in the Congress website. Basically, they can upload anything. No one looks at it. The Congress says, yeah, or okay, delivered, and then check, and that's it. So we decided that we wanted to bring that data to life, and we went to each one of their declarations, I think around 300. We took the data that obviously OCR or nothing works with that, and we did it, well, we automatized what we could, and in the end it was manually, and we created our own database of the assets and the ownings of all the members of the Congress. So we have the database now. We could get to some conclusions, how they, well, we contacted them to see, hey, I have your declaration, it's barely readable. Do you want to give me some information? Some of them did, some other didn't. And in the end, we made a story about all the information we got with their answers, their not answers, and we did the same with Senate. That's something we are doing at El Mundo. We are, like Daniele said, we are also somehow the center of transparency and public service journalism somehow, or at least we try to be, and this is one of the examples of that. And also, we've been lucky. Sometimes the data have come to us through the I network that I talked about. We did the project called Football Leagues, and we suddenly received a lot of data. And we started to work with it. It wasn't just, hey, here you are, here's the story. But we had to, well, put the pieces together, which we could do thanks to our data journalism skills and methods and analytical way of working. When this first came to El Mundo, the investigative team, well, someone there made a comment, something like, yeah, if this comes to a journalist, he has a life of publishing. So basically, I think if this hadn't arrived to a data unit, but a normal, traditional investigative unit, we wouldn't have got to the big news and the big stories that we all together, the network, got to. But we would have had regular publication of stories, like, okay, Cristiano Ronaldo has a company somewhere, and then, okay, also this other person has a company. But the comprehensive approach that was possible because of our data unit and our way of working. So we started with this, with our browser. We put all the data there. Then we created some findings, we call it, where we would put all our findings in there. Then we created a dossier. We have somehow like a Wikipedia now, which we will keep building on. And that right now, even if we have new people in the network and they are not, they weren't in the previous project, but now they can access to that. And we also created a database out of that, which was also possible to do because of our way of working, because we knew how to put the data in columns and how to organize it. And well, we also did a cool graph, but that's for another day. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Paula. And Caelainn, she's going to talk to us about one of her latest investigative projects, but I'll encourage you to, well, as she gets ready, I'll encourage you to Google and look at the presentation she did in NICAR recently at a lightning talk, so something very short about how to collaborate when nobody knows what you do. But she's going to talk about an investigation today.
Thanks. So today I'm going to talk about one of our most recent publications on the data projects team, which was a collaboration with the OCCRP and a number of other partners called the laundromat. So just to begin, for anybody who doesn't know what the laundromat was, or is, I should say, it all started a couple of years ago when a reporter at the OCCRP was handed a bunch of documents. And the documents showed bank transactions. So it was a range of documents, PDFs, Excel files, and what they was required to do was to structure it into a format in which reporters, either data reporters or reporters without data skills, would be able to look through and find stories in. So the documents themselves show tens of thousands of transactions and details about 20 billion in money that was siphoned out of Russia, though they believe that the scheme probably entails about 80 billion overall. So we just have a small snapshot of what was going on within this system. So I'm going to talk about the story. I'm going to show you some of the graphics. So the irony is not lost on me that although we're talking about how to do data journalism without graphics, sometimes the best way of explaining something complicated is to show you a graphic. So I'm going to give you some of the examples that we went through. And then I'm going to talk about why it worked, why it didn't just end up being a series of graphs. Okay, so we got the data towards the end of last year. And at that point, it was very well structured. Some people who work at OCCRP had already formatted into an Excel spreadsheet that anybody could work with. After taking a look through it, it was very simple kind of analysis if you have Excel skills. It was very clear that what the stories we should be focusing on at The Guardian in the UK were that there were UK companies at the heart of this money laundering scheme. And also we wanted to look at the UK banks. So the way by which we did this is we took a structured approach. So we decided, let's find all of the IBANs and the SWIFT codes that relate to particular banks. And then we went into the database and matched it up to that. We also, people at OCCRP also did some matching based on company names, which then we went and did further matching on any of the publicly available data. So what we found was that the UK banks had handled $740 million without question. They didn't flag any payments. They didn't question where the money was coming from, even though when we showed the transactions to investigators, they said that these are the kind of things that really should be raising flags on internal compliance. What we also did then was actually compare what data we had. So the data that was related to the companies, the money that was being sent to individual companies within the database, to public data that was already out there. So one of the key companies in the money laundering scheme was called CBON. And this is the CBON documents within Companies House, so publicly available data in the UK. Very difficult thing with money laundering operations and most kind of financial investigations is that very often what you run into is the issue of beneficial ownership. So we know the name of the company, we know where it is, but we have no idea who really is the ultimate beneficial owner because it goes to the BVI. So CBON was one of the key companies. It received about $9 billion in transactions. It's based on just a regular street in the UK, just round the corner from the mayor's office in London. This is what it looks like from the outside. My yoga studio is just around the corner from it, so I didn't know that for months during the investigation I was walking past where one of the key companies in our investigation is, because they don't have to, because it's just a registry, it's just a place where the company is named as being registered, but there's nothing there, it's a shell company. The other thing to do was then to track where the assets, where there was kind of some ability to track what assets were being owned by these companies. In the UK, we have the land registry, so we basically ran all of the UK companies against the land registry. And we found that CBON, that same company that's registered to a residential building in London Bridge, was the registered owner of a £13 million apartment in Mayfair. One of the other companies owns this property in London, the Bloomsbury Tavern, which is like an iconic pub in the city centre. So those were some of the key findings. But really, in terms of what made this work as an investigation, rather than just ending up as a set of graphs or interactives, were three things. The structure of the data, the data was really cleanly structured and organized by reporters at OCCRP. So that gave me the ability as a data reporter, with 3 or 4 other reporters in the collaboration, to go through and look for key things like the banks and the companies. But it also gave people who didn't have data skills the ability to go in and search for keywords like diamonds or furs or chandeliers, all of which are in the database as well. Collaboration, so collaboration within your own newsroom. So my work is intensely collaborative. I'm actually hardly ever sitting at my desk. I'm usually down talking to other reporters or editors or people on the visual team. And by getting people involved at a very early stage, it means that everybody has a chance to think about what they can contribute to the story. So it doesn't just end up as a set of graphs or the numbers are off to the side. So the numbers are very much written through the story. And that was the third element as well, was getting the numbers, so the data kind of element of the reporting, done very early. So it was handed over to the reporter at an early stage, which was Luke Harding, and the investigations editor, Nick Hopkins. So they had the ability to then go out, put the questions to the company owners, do some digging around to find out a little bit more about what was happening behind the transactions. So those are the kind of 3 elements that made it more than just something that ended up as a visual.
Great. Thank you, Caelainn. So we're going to open it up for questions. So if we can, whoever wants to ask questions, raise your hand and somebody will help with the microphone. Before you ask the question, just as a way of background, can you please explain, all of you work for teams. How big is the team? Can you just briefly?
Yeah, in my case, we are 3 data journalists that sometimes work with a programmer and a designer, but the core team is 3 people.
We're also 3 people, but I would say we're actually probably the only all-female data journalism team that I know of. But that said, we're kind of a multiplier within the newsroom because we're never just working on our own.
Our team is 4 people. We are 2 data journalism, what you would call a unicorn, well, we would call an unicorn, which is a programmer and also a journalist, and then a real, like a full-time programmer.
Great.
That leads to my question, actually. I was wondering for the 4 of you if you can give an overview of what, if any, programming skills you have. I've been struggling with Python and done a bit of scraping, but it's a real struggle.
Okay, in my case, I have mostly any programming skill, in the sense that I can't sit in front of a computer and program something from scratch. I can perfectly understand what the programmer that works with me is doing, and I know that if he knows Python, I can ask him some things. If he knows, I don't know, JavaScript, I can ask him for other things. So, and I think that's a quite important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Daniele. I think if you know what you require and what you can get out of a programming language, you don't necessarily have to have all of those skills yourself if you know someone in your newsroom and can work with them to actually get the work done. I program in R, but I'm probably the only person in my newsroom who does. Well, there is actually, that's not true. There's a couple of people on the interactives team who do, but we're kind of coming at it from different angles. But I think as well, it's important, and I'm not a programmer by background. My degree is in philosophy, so it's not my background by any means, but I think it's important not to be intimidated by what might feel like your lack of skills at any point, because programming's like constant. It's constantly learning how little you know about the language you think you can already write in. So it's, yeah, I wouldn't be disheartened.
And Caelainn, why did you decide to learn R?
I guess that's kind of what I was taught and what I took to. Basically in my day-to-day work, I'm mostly using Excel. It's 80% Excel, but when it gets to a stage with a larger project where I know that Excel is not going to cut it, what I'll try and do is I'll try and use R to begin with. But the tricky thing is that if you're working in a newsroom and other people don't necessarily have the same skills, the same language, coding language skills, it's difficult to kind of hand over. So if you work in R and then can bring it into something like a CSV or a text file or something else, or just translate the findings into words. That's the best way to hand it over then.
Yep, I don't program either, but I try to learn about programming so I can communicate with the people who can.
But didn't you do courses on like JavaScript or HTML or something
Yeah,
like
but
that?
it's design, not really like. I mean, I know HTML, CSS, and really tiny bit of JavaScript, jQuery. But in the end, what I felt when I was studying that was like, okay, I can do something with this, but when I really, really need this to be done, I won't do it. Someone else will. At least that's my experience. I didn't try with like Ruby or Python, but yeah.
Okay.
That's the feeling.
So I'm the moderator, so I'm not supposed to speak much, but that's difficult in me. Those who know me are laughing. So I am more of like at a manager level now, which means that I don't get to do much journalism. So it's exciting. I'm kind of like, I think the role of project managers is more and more increasingly more important in journalism, because a lot of the time, I think all of them said, a lot of the time is spent in talking to other people. And I do a lot of the talking, and I do a lot of that work and coordination and bringing ideas. But my team has a mixture of backgrounds. So we have some people coming from computer engineering, and I have one of the reporters who loves Ruby, and is working on Ruby all the time, but more for like developing applications more than scraping. Then we have one Python developer who does all his scraping in Python. Then we have the other developer who uses like an iMacros type of program that just like, you don't have to write much code and it just downloads, the data, right? But then, for example, he's very fond of ETL tools, extract, transform, and load tools, like Caelainn or Pentaho. And these tools are pretty handy for journalists because all we do is, or not all we do, a lot of what we do is transforming data. And the good thing about ETL tools is that they're very visual, so you hardly need to code. You just need to understand what the drawings mean. So you would say, okay, here's an input from an SQL, and then get these rows and these columns from this from this table of the database. Get these rows and these columns from this table in the database. Mix them together, throw the other way, and then do a SQL output again. And all that is visual. So in the team, the developers are, as you can see, very varied with a very varied background, and they also do reporting and do insights for the stories. And on the other hand, the data journalists that are in the team, they mostly don't know how to code, but they've learned how to code. So for example, one of the people in my team studied with Caelainn at Columbia University, and it's where they learned R. She knows how to use R, and she knows how to use a little bit of Python because they were taught at university, but she's hardly used it for projects because when she starts working on the project, it's already in Excel, so it's kind of like manageable. So any other questions? Raise your hand so we can move the microphone.
Thanks. This slightly builds on the last question, but you've mentioned very, very varied backgrounds in pizza delivery, philosophy, and dance. So what steps did you go through to become, to do the work that you're doing now? What's that missing gap between your backgrounds and what you're doing now?
I start again?
Start pizza guy.
Well, before being a pizza guy, I was studying languages, so like philology also, not journalism, because actually in Italy it doesn't exist. Then the biggest part of my specialization in data and investigation, it was in a master degree where Paula also studied there. In Spain, that is called Master en Periodismo de Datos, Investigación y Visualización. Investigación, Datos y Visualización. It's in Spain. It was, I don't know if the first in Europe, but one of the first in Europe, I'm sure that was. And on the other hand, that was 1 year of specializing on that. On the other hand, it's also quite important the moment, at least for me, the moment in which you arrive in the newsroom and you explain to the editor, okay, what do you do? Because normally he or she doesn't know what exactly data journalism means. So more than the specializing, maybe the most difficult part was like, and let the rest of the newsroom understand why I'm useful, how can I help you, and why do you need me, basically.
And in that sense, before you finish, I know all of them, so I can bring some stuff that they're not saying. Daniele, this is a talk about not just cool graphs, but didn't graphs help you maintain your job and grow your team?
Yeah, but there were not cool graphs. They were super sticky. No, I mean, when I arrived at Confidencial 3 years ago, we didn't have, as we do not have right now, a graphic department as in a normal newspaper. And so the graphs there were like screenshots from studies put in the web page. So we started using super simple tools to make graphs, and so the editors started like thinking, hey, this can be something that is going to make us different from other publications and other newspaper. And then when we made bigger projects, we also involve more people to make cool graphs and really great visualization. And in those cases, we saw how these bring to the pieces, to the stories, more time spent on the page and stuff like that. That are things, concrete number that you can bring to your editor and saying to him, hey, I'm doing a good job here. So that's an interesting part also, obviously.
Any other answers to her question of how did you get here?
Well, actually, I would blame the crisis in Spain. I studied journalism, and advertising and audiovisual communication, which are two diplomas I have in my house. And sometimes they come in handy, but not really. And I didn't know what I was going to do, and then there was no job for journalists. So I decided to look for something that wasn't so common. And using Excel is not common in journalism. We talked about that already. So that's I decided to start the master's also. Yep.
I would say probably the most important thing to have as a data reporter is a structured approach. So something that's probably what differentiates a data reporter from a regular reporter. And that's about it. Is to be able to look at a story and think about the data set behind it. Where can you, or if there is a set of information out there, can you structure it to give yourself some set of information to underpin the story? That's kind of all that is different, really, to my mind, with the kind of reporting that we do. My background, I started in investigative reporting, and data journalism really went hand in hand with that, because it gave me as a reporter something that I could depend on when I was, doing the research, at the research stage of a story. If I had a data set that could stand up a particular angle in a story, that was how I got into data journalism, really. So it's very much about finding a structure, having that structure kind of underpin your story.
I would say, Daniele and Paula, at least in your cases, it also helped to bring you where you are, being so young. The fact that there was no data journalism in Spain. Would you agree with that, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, in Spain, at least in the newsrooms, in Spanish newsroom, there were no examples of data journalism or data journalists. There was a data journalist community in Madrid, really strong. That actually is where Mark come from, also, and also other journalists that are working in big newspapers around the world. But they can't find in their moment they can find their place in Spain, but yes, in other media abroad. So I think that maybe also thanks to the fact that it was a master degree, so for the newspaper it was easier to to find what they were looking for in a specific place, as a master degree can be. And then the fact that, yes, actually, as I said before, our data unit was the first in Spain, and it was 3 years ago something super new. If you said you were doing data journalism, nowadays, at least in the journalistic world, everybody more or less understands what you do and what you're doing.
Yeah, I think, I think you don't take enough credit about this transformation. Basically, Mar and other people started the community, they started the masters, and then Daniele started in a newsroom. Of course, there was a bet on him, like, okay, we're gonna let you try, but it's the beginning of it in the media. Like, there wouldn't be a data unit at El Mundo, which is the second biggest newspaper in Spain, if it wasn't, because El Confidencial started doing that stuff, starting doing big projects, and then in El Mundo they said, hey, maybe we should do that too. And still there is no data unit in the biggest newspaper in Spain, which is El País. They don't have a data unit. So yeah, there were few people, there's still few people, and it started basically in a small newspaper, online newspaper, that showed the others, like, hey, look what we can do.
Great. I see no people in the back wanting to ask questions. Only the front rows.
So my question is, do you give access to...
Are you hearing Kim? I don't think the microphone works.
I do. Yeah. I don't know. No. So do you give access to the public to the data sets you work with, or you just keep it for yourselves and you analyze them yourselves, and why do you do so? For example, the laundromat story and the data declaration.
We don't usually, and it's not because we believe we shouldn't. It's because it's a lot of work. Because you work in a way, and then you get maybe a messy database, and then you are rushing to publish, and in the end it's like, okay, this can wait, or it's not necessary, so you don't do it. But we should, and the spirit is to share the data, and we somehow do share the data. For example, with the congressmen people and senate people, we created an application. So you don't get to download the data, but you can access to it, not just the public, but our own journalists at El Mundo. When they are doing a story, then they can go and check, oh, wait, was this senator, owner of whatever? And then they can go there. But yeah, the idea and what I think we should go towards is also sharing the whole database. Not always, because we run a business also, but in many cases we could do that, and we don't, and in Confidencial they do it better.
Yes, just say in our case we have a GitHub repo where we upload every big and interesting dataset that we have, giving a lot of attention to the data protection part, so depend on each dataset.
It's an interesting question, and I would say our responses at The Guardian, it also depends. I think it is really important that we do, if we don't always publish it, at least that we have to be absolutely clear as to where it's come from. If it's something that's already in the public domain, we will always link back to it in the story anyway, or if we write a methodology piece, we'll be very clear about that as well. But it's important because we're building on, we're still kind of fostering this environment in newsrooms where we're trying to convince people that it's important work. And there is a small community of people doing this work, right? So if we publish the work, we publish our methodologies, then we all kind of inform one another, right? So a rising tide hopefully lifts all boats. But we don't do it as much as we used to at The Guardian. It's something that we've talked about a bit, actually, in the data projects team recently. You asked specifically about the laundromat data that's held by OCCRP. We do, all the partners were given access to it. There's been some details that have been published.
Company names.
Company names. The gentleman who structured the data is just there, 4th row. Put your hand up there, Friedrich.
Could you raise your hand?
Yeah, there he is. So you could chat to Friedrich if you have more specific questions about the data, but we didn't publish it, and there are many reasons for that. There was a discussion around it, But there's also issues if we were to publish a database like that, and the key one was that not necessarily everybody in that database is aware that they're in it or is up to no good, right? So there may be legitimate payments. Of course, there are potentially legitimate payments in there as well, and there are tens of thousands of them. So the conversation was, if we publish this, realistically, we have to contact everyone who's in the data set. That was our lawyer's take on it at the end, so we didn't publish it. But yeah.
Great. Any other questions?
Thank you. So getting back to the title of your topic, data journalism for investigations, I was just thinking that a lot of investigations follow the money and basically they show some corruption. But I think data is also powerful because it shows how it is tethered to every life of every person. So I was thinking how much of what you do can be investigation in the system of health or education or human rights, any aspect, and kind of fixing that rather than telling the story of some corrupted circle.
I think it works very well for all of the areas that you've talked about. Because when we're talking about investigations, to my mind, when we're setting out an investigation, we're trying to prove some wrongdoing, right? But wrongdoing doesn't necessarily have to be corruption, right? It doesn't have to be corrupt officials on the take on public money. It can also be about failures of systems, right? So failures of the privatization of the health system in the UK, which is slowly unfolding, or the division of the public education system in the UK as well, which is kind of also on its way. And using data to underpin those stories is essential because our lives are catalogued in data, right? So in the UK, there's the National Pupils Database, so it takes every individual that's gone through the schooling system and looks at where they were born, what primary school they went through to right through to university. So it's the perfect data set to see, to do analysis, looking at things like if somebody's from a particular background and doesn't get access to what are called grammar schools, whereby you have to pass a particular exam. Does that talk about kind of segregation within the school system, even though it's all public education, right? So, and the way we can look at that is, we could look at that through a data set. So it doesn't have to all be about corruption and leaks, in fact. A lot of data is already in the public domain, particularly with health and education, which you mentioned. And there are fantastic stories that we can do from that. So you don't have to be part of a consortium to be getting investigations out of data. And you don't have to have special access either, because I think there are loads of fantastic data sets in the public domain that we can do investigations with too.
I would just want to add that even though at the ICIJ we're lately known for our leaks and our leaked projects, one of the recent projects, which actually up to the Panama Papers was the project that got us more awards. It's not. We haven't got them through the leaks. It was through a project where we looked at public data from the World Bank. So we looked at the decade of records from the World Bank about how World Bank funded projects were displacing people from their homes or economically, and we were able to account for more than 3 million people that have been displaced from their homes or economically through World Bank funded projects in the past decade. And that was a work that we did from the regular reporting perspective, and I actually came from the tip from a source, but then we used public documents from the World Bank site that we were able to shift through them faster thanks to some scripts done actually by Frederick too, the laundromat guy. And then we were able to just go through them also manually and like structuring that information that had not even been structured by the World Bank. And we created our own database that was later published and that showed again how development projects who are supposed to improve people's lives in reality didn't do that in this case, right? So that's also another example that is not just follow the money. Okay, so we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So if you can raise your hands. There's only 1 more question. Anybody has any other questions? Okay.
Okay, hola. I was wondering about the methods and tools that you use in the Panama Papers and in other investigations to share the information with all the media, all the journalists, in a safe way. The methods and tools that you use to share the information with the journalists to work in the Panama Papers, like El Confidencial, The Guardian.
You're interested in the tools for security?
Yes, and methods that you use.
Okay, so I actually would love also to hear, I think we can all talk about security. I think that it's interesting how the more we do investigations based on sensitive topics, the more we have to deal with security. And it's interesting how the data teams are becoming also the security experts. I guess it's like, oh, you deal with computers, you also know about PGP, right? I guess it's becoming that way, or that's my impression. So in the case of the ICIJ, we're actually kind of like the data providers. And we all need to know about a little bit about security. And for us, it's also security. It's also about how and where do we put the data so that 400 people can access it. And that has meant that we are basically service providers, and we provide the service to these journalists, and that means that we also have to train them. So at ICIJ, we've done a lot of training on, okay, all the 400 journalists in the Panama Papers need to know PGP. You don't know what PGP is? Okay, let's hold this training. So we did trainings, we did manuals, we sent out emails, we did also office hours of like, okay, you tried installing your PGP, it didn't work? Come to us from 1 to 2 in this Hangout link. In several languages too, because a lot of the training materials are in English. There are a few like Security in a Box. It's a great resource and it's translated in many languages. But anyway, like doing it in different languages like English, Spanish, and French has helped spreading security in Latin America and in Africa. And then mainly PGP and then two-factor authentication. All of our platforms, or almost all of them, have two-factor authentication, which means that every journalist that works with ICIJ needs to have a Google Authenticator in their phone, which is an app that generates a code every 30 seconds, so that when you log in, you not only know the passphrase, so the long password, you also have to enter a code that changes every 30 seconds. And that required some training too and some help. That has meant actually that I had to create in the team a support desk, like Microsoft and all these tech companies have a support team where where users call and complain about things not working. So that's one of the most tedious tasks that we have to do, is to hear journalists who want things for now and help me now. It's always for yesterday, and help them with security related issues of like, the Google Authenticator doesn't work. And then there are issues like, oh, because your phone doesn't have automatic time zone and you just move to another country and then it messes things up. So we have to provide that service too. But I think all of you have experience with security. You're also some of the security experts in your newsrooms, right? Because you know how to deal with computers.
Yeah, actually, sometimes we feel like the computer experts in our newsroom. Like my desktop is not working, help me. But basically, in the data team, we perfectly we use on a daily basis PGP for the emails and VeraCrypt. That is a tool that lets you encrypt a part of your hard disk or your whole hard disk. And we are starting to see how some journalists, like counting 2 or 3 for the moment, are approaching us asking for advice. Hey, I want to get in touch with this source. How can I? But he don't want to make it in an email. What can I do? And so we're starting to see how people are getting more and more concerned about the fact that we are helping them with this kind of tools.
Yeah, well, also at El Mundo we have this kind of role, to the point that one time a journalist came and said, hey, I want to contact Anonymous. And you had a phone or something. And we were like, okay. But I think maybe 4 or 5 people have a PGP key at El Mundo, and because I help for the Football Leagues project. And it's difficult to change the standard, like Mar said, like it's messy sometimes, and people want it for now. So suddenly saying, yeah, I will give you this file, but I won't send it in an open email. Just let's create an account. It will take 5 minutes. And you see their faces like, yeah, it's okay, never mind. And I think it will take time. It's necessary. There's no other way around it. When we published, we had a judge saying we couldn't publish. And then we had some hints saying, hey, take care, because this judge sometimes listens to conversations and it's paying attention. So luckily we didn't have any problem this time, but if we don't take care, there will be problems. So in the end, there will be no other way but to learn.
But as building on what you just said, like incentives work. So there was a point where I actually had to say, whoever doesn't have a PGP key will lose their access to the data. And that helped.
Yeah, in terms of tools, I think we use pretty much what everyone's kind of mentioned here already. So PGP for email, for sharing any findings as well. Signal for phone calls and messages. We also have two-factor authentication, TrueCrypt for kind of encrypting files, which are then held on, if it's been held on a hard drive or a laptop that you're traveling with, or even if you're not traveling with it, because you can never be sure, right? But yeah, it really is. I mean, these things change all the time, right? So encryption and the conversation around security moves on all the time. So it's kind of keeping yourself educated about what's going on as well is really important. But in the newsroom, for some of my projects, I've sat down and also written like a step-by-step guide on how to unencrypt attachments and things. But I actually don't mind doing that, because if people see you as the security expert, or on occasion someone will come and ask me to print a spreadsheet, and I can explain to them that you really don't want to print a spreadsheet, but step by step we get there. They know that you're the person who deals with spreadsheets, so I'll print them a spreadsheet, and next time when I have a story or they have something they want to ask about that involves a spreadsheet, they'll know that they can come to us. So it's with some people in the newsroom, it's a process of education. It's education of yourself and the people that you work with, and it's step by step.
Great. I think that's a great note to end the panel on. So please help me in thanking these people with a big applause.